Hello, I'm Janet Silver. The House of Commons is set to return on Monday after a 6-week break for the holidays. And the governor of the Bank of Canada has announced that he's going to be raising interest rates again. And economists are warning that we could be heading for another recession later this year. How might all of this affect the legislative agenda in the coming weeks? Joining me now are two experienced operatives and my colleagues here at Syntax Strategic, Jon Dugal and Jake Enwright. And Jake, I'm going to start with you because the Prime Minister has met this week with his cabinet, and the economy was number one on the agenda. And I'm just wondering, given all that's happening in terms of the economy, how do you expect this is going to affect the agenda in the coming weeks?
I don't think it's going to impact the agenda necessarily all that much. A great deal of Justin Trudeau's mandate has been executed under some kind of economic duress, even going right back to the very beginning, with constant criticism of running deficits that were higher than he promised during his first election as Liberal leader. So it's not going to change his agenda all that much, and it's not going to be a distraction. I think the Liberals have watched closely what's happened in the United States with the Democratic Party achieving a better election result than anticipated with an economic issues set that Republicans were supposed to capitalize on. They've even signaled as much. That they're still going to continue with their agenda despite being fiscally prudent. And I think all they have to do is just say that they're being economically aware as they execute on their mandate in order to convince people of that.
Speaking of agenda, Jon, one of the things that NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, he had a press conference earlier this month in Ottawa, and key for them is pharmacare. And we know that healthcare has been top of mind for a number of weeks now. I'm just wondering, where do you think pharmacare lies in the agenda in the coming months?
Certainly on the table for this year. Under the deal, the supply and confidence agreement, it is to be acted on at least this year with a bill forthcoming. The government has certainly signaled that it's going to have something by the end of the year on the table. To me, if I were a stakeholder, I wouldn't necessarily be looking at it in this current session, the winter session of Parliament ending in June, just because of how many moving pieces they do have on the table right now. There are the Canada Health Transfer negotiations. There is rumored to be an air passenger bill of rights that is due this spring, an update there, which that has been a very big thorn in the government side. So it's something they're going to have to act on immediately. So there's no rush for the government to get to pharmacare, but it's definitely on the radar this year. And having done the legwork a few years ago with the Hoskins report in particular, they will be in a much better position now to move on this compared to what they might have been in a position last year, for example, on dental care.
One of the things that Minister Jonathan Wilkinson put forth a few weeks ago is the Just Transition Act. And Jake, I want to get your thoughts on that because that has not sat very well for Alberta, particularly Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. She's been very vocal about this. What do we know about that bill, and why would Alberta be so opposed to it, for example?
They see it as a direct threat on their way of life and a signal that the government wants and is going to proactively push to have a transition away from the fossil fuel and energy sector that drives the economy of Alberta and Canada writ large. That said, the government has seemingly come to a realization that it can't pursue an ideological agenda on the energy sector, that will be rejected by voters as most ideological politicians are being rejected by voters across Western democracies at this time. I think that's why they've said at COP27 that they're not going to sign any international agreements that talk about phasing out fossil fuels. I think it's wide to your previous question. They're starting to use language about economic and fiscal prudence. And at the end of the day, I think the legislation, the idea is only designed to get the government into a fight with Danielle Smith and to wedge federal conservatives to either take the side of a politician who's not very popular, not only in our own province, but across the nation. And ultimately, I don't think anyone should be surprised or anticipate this legislation will pass. To your previous question to Jon, it's a government that doesn't do a lot of things at once very well. They really have to focus on one thing at a time. They have a lot on their plate. This is just political stunt work by the minister, by the prime minister to provoke that fight with Danielle Smith, which has happened.
You just mentioned about a lot on their plate, and let's go back to healthcare, because one of the things that the prime minister announced this week was that he will be meeting with the premiers on February 7th here in Ottawa to talk about health transfers. And we know that and we've talked about it on this podcast before, that is a super sensitive topic. Premiers want more. The feds are wanting conditions. Jon, do we have a sense in terms of what sort of the conditions that the federal government would like to have if there's going to be an increase in payments? And the Prime Minister said it's not all about money, which isn't it at the end of the day about money?
Well, for the government, it's going to come down to one word, and it's going to be a different word than money. It's going to be outcomes. And to be quite frank, that is going to be the condition that is going to be placed on the Canada Health Transfer that really gets this thing across the line. From what we understand from government sources and what's been publicly reported on as well, there is certainly a look at having a broad-based increase to the Canada Health Transfer. Of course, the premiers are asking for an increase from 22% base funding transfers in terms of cash transfers up to 35%, which is supposed to be the federal quota there. But the federal government, of course, they would fight back on that and say, well, since the 1970s, we've been transferring you tax points, which actually make up the gap there. So that is going to be one piece that needs to get addressed. And there's also going to be separate funding deals set up here that the federal government will certainly argue will be encompassed under the Canada Health Transfer or under health transfers more broadly. They will just be more set up in terms of targeted funding. So whether it's on some of these health data pieces, ensuring that we have an actual digital health system, that health is digital first or digital by design, especially as it relates to data and the sharing of data, not only between the provinces and the federal government, so that the federal government can have a better sense of where exactly the funds are going at the provincial level, and so that everybody can, so that planning strategies can be more acutely designed and delivered. But also just to ensure that accountability that, the provinces have been saying for quite some time now that, we are accountable to our people because we go to the polls every 4 years. However, as it stands, health reporting under the Institutes of Health Research, et cetera, it's, kind of murky when it does come to the actual dollars and cents that do go into health funding at the provincial level. So that's going to be something that needs to get addressed. It's pretty clear they want to make movement on long-term care, but especially important here will be reducing the backlogs in the ERs and just creating more capacity throughout the health system. So hiring doctors and nurses, et cetera. Those are all long-term projects. So it's definitely going to be a big sum of money to be rolled out over several years. And this should provide at least some certainty to the marketplace there.
Jake, what's your sense? Because you talked a little bit earlier with regards to the relationship between Premier Danielle Smith and the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. We can take it broader than that in terms of the Ontario Premier. There's some conservative premiers that aren't necessarily going to be gung-ho to give the Prime Minister a win on this. So how do you see that going?
I tend to disagree. I don't think conservative premiers who are in power right now necessarily view Justin Trudeau as their adversary politically at the moment. I think they're perfectly happy to give Justin Trudeau a win on this, actually, because most premiers come from the more progressive wing of the conservative movement right now, with the exception of Danielle Smith, and will not be, take for example Mr. Ford, and I'm not saying he does, but if he did in the back of his mind have higher aspirations to be prime minister, well, that can only happen if Pierre Poilievre doesn't become prime minister. Handing the prime minister a win on healthcare might actually be strategically advantageous if he was seeing so far into the future. So really, at the end of the day, I think this is just a reality of public opinion and push coming to shove. Something had to be done. Too many premiers, as you can hear my child screaming in the background there. She's sick. Too many premiers, the prime minister included, are starting to see the polling and having this issue really take hold. The narrative is solidified. The healthcare system's broken. The question is, what's the fix? And this is the easiest fix within our confederation and our jurisdictional delineation of responsibilities. So I think this is going to be a bit of window dressing in terms of just throwing more money at it. Public data better tracking and data sharing for health information. I don't think anybody really is going to care about that at the end of the day. It's going to be whether or not they can fix the problem that everybody's seeing right in front of them at the emergency room.
Yeah, and Jake actually made a good point point out Doug Ford there. Doug Ford, as a Conservative premier, actually, he demonstrated just how pragmatic he can be, becoming the first and truly the only premier to really come out of the woodwork of that patchwork, that broad coalition that was holding firm for so long to say, we will not accept conditional transfers. We will only accept a baseline increase to the health transfers out of cash transfer. When he came out 2 or 3 weeks ago, they say that, I would accept some conditional funding to address very specific issues that Justin and I agree on, whether it does relate to long-term care, whether it does relate to better health data. And he did seem to indicate that he would be open to that. So that shows the pragmatism and maybe a bit of a break in that line, Janet, in terms of the provinces giving that win that Jake was saying, because they had created the foil in Justin Trudeau earlier on in the process to say that he wasn't coming to the table. And now that he has, they've at least, increased their leverage early on in the process so that they can get down to a better deal at the end.
Just before we go, and this is coming from left field, and I'm sorry, Jake, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre also had a press conference this week, and it was said before the press conference, Melissa Lantsman had indicated to journalists that Pierre Poilievre would come out and speak to journalists more. Are we seeing a bit of a change here in terms of them looking ahead, the Conservatives looking ahead, the party leader looking ahead to, perhaps an election in a year and a half or before, and a slightly different strategy when it comes to dealing with the media?
No, it was always designed this way to set up an ultimate, confrontation once he started appearing in front of the media more, not for electoral purposes. It's for fundraising purposes. Every time Pierre Poilievre gets out in front of the cameras and fights with the media or pushes back on the media, that's a good day for him. It means more money in Conservative coffers from donors. It means that his caucus is happy seeing him fight on their behalf, and Conservative members are happy seeing their guy push back against an industry that increasingly more and more Canadians don't trust. It's a win-win for him. At the end of the day, roughly 30% of the Canadian population is considered the engaged population, following things on a daily basis. The vast majority of people consuming national news, especially national political news, would fall into that engaged audience already. They're already decided voters. It doesn't matter to him. It's all about how he's viewed with caucus members and the money he's bringing in to get ready for the next election.
Something we'll all be watching in the coming weeks. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you to my colleagues, Jon Dugal and Jake Enwright. I'm Janet Silver. Till next time.